It's chapter 15, and the title is Love Sickness and Its Cure. And I have to say this. In reading this one, at first I'm like, where are we going with this? I'm confused. But in the end, you'll realize, for me, it was one of the most uplifting and very encouraging ones, because it talks about, in the end, we're going to talk about our relationship with the Lord. So in the end, it becomes very encouraging. But initially, we are going to talk about love sickness, which sounds a little odd, but so love sickness. When you think about love sickness, probably the first thing that one of the first things that everyone usually understands is Charlie Brown and Peppermint Patty. If you're familiar with Charlie Brown, Peppermint Patty was constantly chasing him around. She seriously was obsessed with him. Serious crush. Charlie Brown, he had his own crush going with the little redheaded girl. And, you know, that's just the way love goes when you're that age. You know, you fall in love, they're not interested, they're interested in someone else. The English poet Abraham Crawley said, "A mighty pain to love it is, and 'tis a pain that pain to miss. But of all the pains, the greatest pain is to love, but love in vain." And that's love sickness, to love in vain. And if you're familiar with the author Joyce Carol Oates, I have read some of her things, her novels, and they're very good. But she says the worst thing is to give yourself away for not enough love. And we talked a little bit last week about giving ourselves too much too soon. But to give and get nothing in return is very frustrating and agonizing. And most of us relate it to like high school, when everybody has to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or feel they have to be connected, or if you're really wanting to work somewhere because you like that environment or that thing, you really want that job, and it almost, you get a love sickness for that job or that position, but you get rejected. And if you've ever done a job search, that it does feel like like love sickness, because you get it in your head that this is the job for me, and then that job is denied you. So the problem is, most of the time we say, well, how does this happen? How do I get lovesick over something? And we want a reasoning. The problem is, we think about it in terms of a sickness, because if you get sick, you say, where did I get this from? If I get the flu, I think, okay, who was I around that had the flu? Who did I get this from? But that's not how love sickness works, because love sickness is more of the inability to think clearly. You have an excessive focus on an individual or a thing. Your emotions go haywire. You forget to do important things because you're too focused on that person or that thing. You have poor judgment. And your heart is deeply troubled over unrequited love. So we get love sickness because of decisions that we make, not because we can catch it from somebody. So we're going to talk about a biblical love story that most of us are not real familiar with. I wasn't at all. And it's an account. Some scholars call it an account of a true romance. Some call it an allegory, with the lovers being Christ and the beloved being the believers. So I'm going to put this up, and for most of while I'm talking about it, I'm going to leave it up so you can read it, because I know for me, I had to go back and forth and look at the passage for it to make sense for me. So let me share. Hold on. I'm going to share the screen so you can see. Okay. So I will leave it up so you can see what we're talking about. Otherwise, and this is going to be, it's going to be a little difficult for me to handle like 3 screens. So yell at me if you have something to say. Please talk out loud because I got 3 screens going at right now. So we have the Song of Songs, verse 5, chapter 5, verse 1 through 8. Now I'll read through it, but we're going to go back and kind of review different parts. The lover says, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. So the lover is approaching his beloved. The beloved responds with, I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my lover is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My head is drenched in dew, my hair with the dampness of the night. So he's knocking and he's saying, open the door to me. And then she says, I have taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I've washed my feet. Must I soil them again? My lover thrust his hand through the latch opening. My heart begins to pound for him. I rose to open for my lover, and my hand drenched with myrrh. I opened for my lover, but my lover had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak. Those watchmen of the walls. O daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, it's supposed to be, if you find my lover, will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. So what we see here is a lover and a beloved who are kind of on different pages when it comes to, hold on here, I got to move something around because I can't see what I'm doing. Come on. No. No. Okay. I'll move you guys over here. There we go. And then move this up here so I can see it. Okay, so what we have here is we have a lover and a beloved who are not in the same places. The lover comes and he finds that his beloved is not awake, and she is not willing to be inconvenienced for the relationship. As you notice, she's like, do I have to put my robe back on? Do I gotta get my feet dirty? So therefore, she doesn't really value or have the same interest in the relationship. And she's not in the same place he is at that moment. She's asleep, he comes to the door, and he really feels like he's coming to his beloved and she will respond. What you'll notice is that to be together, they need to be equal partners, but obviously they're not. Mm. So she's asleep, but her heart is somewhere else, awake. She's divided. Her attention is divided. And she has not given herself to the relationship completely. She's distracted. She's kind of all over the place. He's infatuated because he's coming and he's calling her all these beautiful names. You know, he's my sister, my bride, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. He's totally gone. And she hears this, but it doesn't seem to connect with her. So what we see is that it's not a real healthy relationship because both participants would be focused on each other. And what's happening here is he's really focused on her and she's like, not really. Truly love sickness, where one person is given excess time, energy, focus, and the other is like, kind of distracted and halfway there. And there's a principle of magnification at work here. And I loved when the author talked about this. He said, it's the principle that whatever we focus on becomes bigger and bigger and bigger in our minds as we realize it's something we really want. Like, I would like a piece of that chocolate cake that's in my kitchen, right? Really want it. I've already had a piece of chocolate cake. I really shouldn't have another piece of chocolate cake. It's bad for me. For whatever reason, I should not allow myself another piece of chocolate cake. Now, that will become increasingly important to me until I do something to satisfy that craving. So that's that love sickness. There's a craving that you feel like you need to satisfy. And what happens is it magnifies whatever's happening. So now, no matter how big a place someone holds in your heart and mind, if you hold a smaller place in theirs, it's not an equal relationship. So it's important to do your best to assess clearly how you feel and how the other person feels. And does that feel equal? If both parties are in it equally and you're both madly in love, go for it. But if it feels like it's one-sided, like this beloved and her lover, it's time to cut and run. It's time to just, and it may feel like it's painful, but it's time to cut and run because, you know, if you're in a relationship where, like the beloved, she doesn't want to be bothered. Her lover knocked on the door and she says, should I get out of bed? Should I put on my robe? Bluntly, she's not interested. She doesn't even realize she's being hurtful to her lover by rejecting him. Now, the author gave this example of, there was a person who told him this story. Her name was Belinda, and she worked for a company who does promotional pieces. And her company was doing this promotional piece for a client, and they're in the midst of this with a strict deadline. They're in the midst of getting it all developed, and it's going to be a critical piece to increase his credibility and his marketability for whatever he's doing. Well, as they're doing it, they realize at the last minute that there's something about the data that they're including that doesn't feel right. There's something not adding up correctly or whatever. So Belinda calls the client and says, hey, something's not adding up right. We need to fix this quickly. And he says, I'm watching my favorite TV show right now. I'll get back to you later. Well, for Belinda and her team, they needed the information immediately for him. They were doing it for him. He was their client, but he seemed like he didn't really care. And they were doing everything they could for the client, but the client didn't seem interested. So that's another it's kind of love sickness, but in another realm of work where you feel like you're working very hard for somebody and their response to you is very nonchalant and doesn't really matter, even though there's a hard deadline. And what that tells us is where they are in the relationship and where you are in the relationship. So if you look at the beloved, she doesn't value her lover's interest or presence, but she finally gets out of bed. And when she does, she finds out he's gone. And she goes looking for him. Well, he gave up. And what that tells us is timing is everything. So sometimes what we find is if you've ever known somebody or been in a relationship or almost got into a relationship with someone where timing is everything. They felt you were the sun and the moon and the stars, and then that kind of waned and they went the other way, and suddenly you feel they're the sun and the moon and the stars, but it's not at the same time. So timing is everything. And if you're not both in the same place, the effort can be counterproductive. And that means it's time to split and just let it go. So again, when people are not valued, they don't, they feel, they begin to withhold from the relationship. They're exhausted, even though they feel like they had the legitimate feelings they needed to be in the relationship. They didn't feel like they could, that their needs were being met either. But one thing that's important is that some needs that we have as human beings can only be fulfilled by God. And we try to rely upon humans to fulfill those needs, not God. So we have to be careful what we're looking for when we're looking for a partner, a job, a positive work environment. Some of that affirmation and that love or acceptance can only be gotten. We can only get that from God, but we're looking for it in the wrong place, in other people. Now, God can help us heal from those situations and move on to healthy relationships, but we also need to understand what we're getting from these relationships and what comes from God and what comes from a healthy relationship. What is the cure for love sickness? Well, first of all, if you don't feel loved back, then it's love sickness, right? And there is, like I said, there are relational needs that only God can fulfill for us. So if we look at the story and we think about how God loves us and is lovesick for us, let's look at it that way, okay? This story is very similar to in Revelation 3:20, where Christ is knocking on the door and asking to be allowed in. You've seen the painting, knocking on the door. If you open, I will enter into your heart. And what we find is we think that God or Christ will tire of knocking and will tire of trying to pursue us. And what we know, but sometimes forget, is that Christ will never grow weary of pursuing us, because he wants to be in every aspect of our lives. And he desires a deep and personal relationship, and it's the kind of relationship that no human can provide. So even when we're thinking, oh, I need human companionship, there's a part of you that even human companionship cannot fulfill, because only God can do that for you, okay? So it's what they call the vertical factor. The benefit we receive is that God's love is genuine and unconditional, and humans can't love that way. He loves us perfectly and accepts us completely. So he doesn't worry about our faults, and there's no argument between you and God about you didn't pick up your socks or you used the toothpaste rolled the toothpaste wrong or whatever. It's a vertical aspect of the relationship. It's up and down between heaven and earth. And we've heard Pastor talk about this numerous times. He talks up and down. It's between us and God. So it's that vertical aspect of the relationship. So if we think about it in that way, and we look at how the lover is talking to the beloved, and if this were Christ, and he said, sister, he calls out to my sister in Song of Songs. Well, that would represent to us that we are the family of God through adoption. We are accepted. We are wanted in a place of love, hope, healing, and strength. So whenever the terminology is that of family, brother, sister, mother, father, it's all about family, that we are part of God's family through adoption. He says, my darling, okay? That represents God saying, I have deep affection and want deep intimacy with you. Your name is engraved on the palm of his hand, and he takes great delight in you because you're always there. When you think about, I started thinking about, well, if you're engraved in the palm of God's hand, that's like a tattoo. That's what immediately came to my hand. And you can remove those, but they're really painful and really, um, there's always some residue of it left. And I thought, you know what? That's how we are to God. We are engraved in the palm of his hand so he could never forget us. And he would take great delight in us and always keep us close. The next one is he calls his beloved my dove. That represents peace. The beauty of God's love is that he brings perfect peace into your life, no matter where you're at. Even though life is unpredictable and uncertain, he'll never let you down. And his steadiness infuses your life with peace. Now, sometimes we think, no, that doesn't feel that way. But if we stop and we think and we open ourselves up to it, when we feel stressed and we feel like all over the place, if we stop and we talk to God, you know, we hear a testimony of people all the time that say, well, when I stopped and I just refocused on God instead of the situation, I had that peace. And that's what he gives us. He gives us that peace because that's part of the relationship. The next one is my flawless one. And that represents the fact that God is not fixated on our sin. Isn't that amazing? He considers us flawless. He considers us totally without flaw, he perfect. We would call someone who thinks they are flawless arrogant. But Christ's sacrifice makes us righteous, acceptable, and perfect in God's eyes. So we're not being arrogant when we say we are seen as flawless. And I love that, because when you think about people who walk around and think they're so very important and that they deserve some kind of accolade from us because they're so important. And yet we get that automatically because we are God's. We're part of his family. He has given us his perfect peace. We are etched in the palm of his hand. So those things, hold on here. Those are the things that he gives us based on our relationship with him. And that's the perfect relationship. So all in all, this Song of Songs, if you look at it, could be us saying to God, oh, do I have to put on my shoes to go to church again? Do I have to get dressed? And then us going out and saying, where is he? Where did he go? Well, he didn't go anywhere, really. He's still there for us. He always will be. And we just have put him on, he's lovesick for us, but we've put him aside instead of where he needs to be. So it's a short chapter, but it's, to me, initially I was like, where are we going with this lovesickness? But it made so much sense to me when I looked at it in the terms of this is what God thinks of me. He thinks of me as his darling, as his dove, as his flawless one, as his sister, as his brother. I mean, he comes looking for us, and he never stops reaching and reaching for us to grab us. And this was probably the most encouraging chapter that I read, and I was like, this is awesome. It was hard to get into initially because I was like, where are we going with this lovesickness? But when you consider that God has a lovesickness for us, and the cure is just loving him back. And that there's something that God gives us that no personal relationship can ever fill. So when we look around for another human being to be our partner and we still feel unfulfilled, maybe we're looking at the wrong thing. We're looking for a human to fill what God needs to fill for us. So that is the whole chapter. It's kind of what I call, I think, one of the most amazing chapters. So I'm going to read the reminders at the end, so you could just like, they're just quick summaries. And then we'll talk a little bit. Love sickness is not physical illness. It's something that afflicts the heart of the person who's madly in love or completely focused on someone else who does not acknowledge interest or return affection. Lovesick people often find that the ones they love are not awakened to the way they feel about them, or simply do not care about how much they long for them. Lovesick people need to realize that people who do not want to be inconvenienced or who are uncomfortable in relationships do not qualify as good candidates for great relationships. Lovesick people need to understand that they may need to walk away from people who do not value their presence. A relationship with another human being will never be an antidote for lovesickness. The only way to cure a lovesick heart is through a deep personal relationship with God. God is lovesick for you. You are his sister, his brother, his darling, his dove, and his flawless one. So those are the summaries. So I'm going to throw out some questions for you, and we'll see what you think. Here's one. Have you ever thought about God in terms of a lover pursuing you, his beloved? What does that mean to you, and how do you feel about it?
Well, I recall the analogy that is often spoke of as God in a marriage, or God being married to Israel, and he called her a backsliding heifer or whatever. So that's portrayed a lot in the Old Testament, where they went a whoring after other gods, and he had to cause something to come upon them to bring them back. So I look at that as what was the question? I don't know if I'm targeting the question.
What about God pursuing you as a lover?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's how I think of it, is that he will cause something to happen to get your attention, to remind you that I'm number one. I'm the most important thing of being in your life, and you should be pursuing me at all times. Keep me at the top, as opposed to making me second, or putting me on the back burner. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I'd heard that God pursuing God as a lover, or God pursues us as a lover. But I never thought about that he totally, and that he fills a part of us that nothing else can fill. But I never put the two together.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a love sickness in us for him.
Yes.
And he can fill that. And that when we are pursuing something, if there's something we should pursue like a lovesick person, it would be him, because he can fulfill what we need, because what we want is what we get from him. So yeah, that it's I just never thought of it in those terms. How do you feel about the being called his darling and his sister or brother, or his, how did that make you feel? Or being etched in his hand? That always just gives me kind of goosebumps.
It's weird at first sight, because so often, particularly with the darling, we associate that with with physical intimacy, a romantic type of love. And so thinking about God, not so much in those terms, but just it butting up against that type of intimacy because of the language used kind of makes you go, what? But I think that it's good because it makes you really reflect on the depth of the quality of that love. Yeah.
I mean, and knowing that adoption into his family makes us like a sister, a brother, we talk about it, but when you see it in these terms of these things, he's my peace. How about this one? How do you feel when you realize that God wants to bring peace to every area of your life? I know. And sometimes I think to myself, why do I only look for it in certain areas? Why do I always limit him and say I need peace over here, but instead of, and the only time I ask for complete peace is when I feel like everything's in an uproar. Instead of saying I should have complete peace all the time. When I'm driving, when I'm, somebody does something, because I'm one, there's always somebody doing something strange on today, somebody doing something strange on the road. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm thinking, what? I should have just had God's peace and sat there and stared at them until they figured out what they were doing. This woman couldn't quite make the turn. She's turning right, but she's turning right into me. And I'm sitting there looking at her. And she's looking at me like I'm in the wrong place. And I had nowhere to go because there's somebody behind me. But instead of seeing it as, there really was nothing I could do. So I had to sit there. And in a sense, I think that's what we have to, like, I have nothing I can do. God had to give me peace at that moment.
I know for me, one of my challenges with that is, it takes a lot of like conscious effort on my part to deprogram myself for what I was conditioned with growing up. And this idea that certain things, certain areas, like you were asking about not seeking peace or expecting peace in every area. I've been conditioned to believe that some areas are not important enough, that God's not that superficial, and we need that we need the big stuff to be coming before God, and the other stuff is like that's child's play. So I have to like consciously reinforce to myself, no, he cares about that too. So some of it I think is conditioning.
I think you're right. I think we like to think that he's only there for the important things. And when we need him, he's always there. And we love to say, yes, he's always there when I need him, and he makes things happen, and he heals, and he provides, and we forget about, he gets us up, he wakes us up in the morning. It's as simple as that. He wakes us up in the morning. And do we realize that, and that we can wake up in a good mood or a bad mood, or have peace or not? And I think, and I forget about that. I forget about, the little things, that he just does the little things, that I can get up and I can, there's not a flood in my basement, and there's not a tree in my living room, and, storms blow through and there's no damage, and, and we don't even really think about it. I mean, we think about it, yeah, kind of, but when we don't, if it's just a small rainstorm and we think, nothing important could happen. Well, it could. You could have water in your basement, and you just don't even realize it. But we forget about it. And when things go horribly wrong, we're like, well, why isn't he moving fast enough? And instead of seeing him as always there and always working for and helping us and being there for us, we want him to step in instead of saying, I know you're always here with me. Because we always say, I want you to step in instead of, I know you're always here with me. And it's a refocus and a rethink. And that, I think that's where this took me, is the idea that he's always there, not why don't you step in and take care of this for me? I just need to have that you're always here for me no matter what, even when things are going blah. Nothing good, nothing bad, just kind of my everyday stuff. It's okay. I don't know. What did you all think about the series? It was a little long in my perspective. It was a little long. I know Marcia and I, reading the book, we probably got some things that maybe you guys may not have gotten from how we taught it, but it's a very good book, a very easy read. And I would say to anybody who felt like, is there more, to just pick it up and read it. It's not going to take you long. It's not a hard read, but it really, he writes very, he writes, to me, to the common person. He doesn't try to be highfalutin. He tries to give you stories that you'll understand. But he challenges you and challenges the way you think. And so if relationships are an issue, I think it's a great book. But what did you guys think of it?
I like the book. I told my brother he needs to read this book before he gets another girlfriend. He's not, of course, but yeah, it's a book for everybody who is in any kind of relationship, any kind of brother, sister, mother, father, friend, coworker, girlfriend, married, engaged, whatever. There's something in this book for everything.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we say relationship, Marcia probably agrees with me. I felt like I couldn't emphasize enough. We're not just talking about dating. We're talking about like people who are in your life, who are your friends, who are your co-ministers, who are your people that you are interacting with at work, and how some people are more important to you and connect with you better than others. And we know that, but how do we make that better? I know I was talking to somebody at work about this, and she was like, I think I need to read that. And I said I would gladly loan it to her, because she said she's divorced and she's dating. And so I think for her, it was like, and there are some things in it that she, we were talking about that she thought was very interesting. So like you said, Marcia, there are people who probably could pick this up and say, oh, wow. And it makes you, you know what? It makes you feel good about being single too. It does. Because it says, don't waste your time.
Well, for my part, I really did enjoy it. And it was long, but I think that, like necessarily so, because I had to hit so many different dynamics, which makes it, I think, a great like tool for your tool belt, or a resource to keep going back to from time to time, depending on the type of relationship or the type of dynamic that you're trying to address, because it offers something to each different type of dynamic you might face. So yeah, I think it's that was a very good book.
And I could see us possibly like doing it again for a group of people who were really wanting to work on and do a really in-depth, where everybody got the book. We went chapter, like a book club, and did the work of, some of this stuff, and really held people accountable for people who really were looking to do some work about their relationships. I could see that happening for people who wanted that. I could see it being a book that if any of us ran across someone who was having some relationship problems, we could refer them to the book. So yeah, I mean, when we first chose it, I thought, oh, it sounds good, but I really, he does a really good job. So, and it's a fairly easy read, really is. So y'all enjoyed it?
Yes, and for me, it you're kind of skeptical as to what you should do to handle a relationship, or what direction you should go in approaching the other party. And I think you all affirmed some things for me, especially in regard to my neighbor down the hall who was asking me to go to the store for her every weekend. And I was just like, I don't want to hurt her feelings by telling her I just don't want to go this time. I just want to, not that I had anything to do. I don't want to take my personal time and take time out to do that every weekend for,
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't that bad. And she's still we're in a good, place, a good space, cordial, but I'm not doing that every weekend. I'm not giving her my time when she's retired and at home 7 days a week pretty much, and I'm working 5 days a week and having to take my time and go and run to the store for her. But that's just one of the big takeaways that I got out of it, is being able to, you confirmed that for me, that it was okay to approach people and not to be, I guess, sort of a pushover, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's really a testimony, because if you can take something, and just so happened that week we were talking about that, and you're like, how do I approach this? How do I do this? And and we all agree, just do it in love, and do it just approach it and see where she is with it, and just say, you don't have to explain everything to her. Just say you can't, and see where she takes it. And she took it well, so the group was very supportive, and it worked. So that was a real testimony, because we were all like, well, you gotta talk to her, because otherwise she's just gonna expect it. So that was wonderful. Yeah. So that's all we have, folks. But I think it's again, something that can be repeated and is a good book. So if anybody wants to read it, we'll have to offer it up to everybody, because there's stuff that as you read it, you just kind of smacks you upside the head a few times, and you think to yourself, oh dear, I do that. Maybe I should stop doing that, so. But that's it for this week. I know it's a short one, but just know that God fills that lovesick spot for you. And that's very encouraging to me, that he's always there, and he's not going to be the lover that walks away.